Chief Economist at Macro Business, and a man I like to have on this program to discuss finances. It's Leith Van Onselen. Good morning, Leith. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, g'day, mate. How are you?
Very well, thank you. So we had the election here. It's interesting to me to some extent. This is not exactly what I plan to ask you about, but while we're talking, the reactions from other world leaders, well, of course, they're going to say congratulations, all that kind of thing. But the take that implies Australia's going against the trend in the rest of the Western world, or the rest of the civilized world, if I can put it that way. But the fact of the matter, I don't know how many countries actually elect a prime minister and his party in a landslide when their first preference for only 1 in 3 voters.
Yeah, look, Australia certainly has a weird system here, Mike. I mean, obviously we've got preferential voting, so it's the most preferred party rather than the actual one that everyone necessarily wants.
Yeah.
And it's just the nature of the beast. And I knew yesterday on Saturday when I rocked up to vote that I always put minor parties first whenever I vote. But
right.
You always know. For me, I always know whichever major party is highest on my preference list is the one that's going to ultimately get my vote. But that's just the nature of the beast, unfortunately, here, or fortunately, depends on what your view is. But it's we have a preferential system, so it means that often our leaders, get elected with, say, 1/3 of the primary vote. Not exactly a massive mandate.
No, indeed. Although, of course, the true believers in the government themselves are saying it is a massive mandate. But I was just curious how you see the finances of this stacking up. I mean, people called it the cash splash election. Somebody said it was the sale of the century election. I had a look at the very long list involving some, relatively small amounts of money, like 8 or 9 million, but others up in the 500 million, and there's a humongous list. Some Australians will have Christmas in July, not till next year, of course, 2026, but the spending relative to, other dreary things like productivity seems way out of balance, but how do you see it?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, the Australian federal budget is facing a decade of deficits. So basically a decade where the money coming in isn't as much as the money going out. And even before, straight after the federal budget this year, last month I think it was, I'm starting to lose track of time now, Mike. It was in obviously in March.
Yeah.
When the federal budget came out. Back then, Deloitte was predicting that this coming financial year, so I'm talking about the 2025-26 financial year, we're going to have a headline deficit. That's basically the cash deficit. That's money in versus money out.
Yeah.
Of $75 billion. And we're actually going to have $256 billion of deficits over the 4-year forward estimates. So, that's obviously a big sum of money. And that was before all these latest cash splashes that we saw over the past, month since the federal budget. The federal budget is officially projected to be in deficit for the next decade. We're looking at $256 billion of cash deficits over the next 4 years alone. And I'm not sure how much worse it was made by all these promises, but because, it's very hard to keep track of them all and the ins and outs, etc.
Yeah.
But obviously the situation would have gotten even worse. And the problem with it is, Mike, is it comes at the same time as Australia's budget's facing a whole bunch of headwinds anyway. Because, one of the things that showered the budget with heaps of money over the Albanese government's first term was the Russia invasion of Ukraine. So what that actually did was that drove up global commodity prices. So we're talking, natural gas, iron ore, coal, all those sorts of things went through the roof. And what it meant is that the federal budget got a whole bunch more company tax revenues. And also we had much higher immigration than was forecast by the federal government when they first came in last term. And what that meant was we got a whole bunch more workers in the economy because we had, 1 million plus migrants in a couple of years, and most of those work. So that bolstered federal government tax receipts. And then also we had higher than expected inflation and nominal wage growth, even though real wages went backwards. So what that did was that pushed a lot of workers into higher tax brackets or increased their average tax rate. So according to Deloitte, the Albanese government got $361 billion of extra money because of these factors. Now, the problem with it is these factors, even before all these cash splashes we saw over the election campaign, the federal budget was already facing huge, stiff headwinds. So commodity prices, iron ore, coal, natural gas, well, not so much natural gas, but iron ore and coal and other commodities have fallen in price, have been falling, and that's going to lower, and they're expected to continue falling, and that's going to lower company tax receipts. And immigration and wage growth is also slowing, which means the federal budget is going to get less growth in personal income tax receipts. So the picture, the way it already is pretty bad. And then at the same time, on the expense side, apart from all these cash splashes, obviously we have the elephant in the room, which is the National Disability Insurance Scheme, which already costs nearly $50 billion a year. It's enormous.
Yeah.
And that alone, Mike, is projected to grow to nearly $100 billion within a decade. So it's going to roughly double in size in expenditures. And that obviously means that the federal budget is going to have this continually growing black hole, which has to be funded. At the same time, we've got to fund all this other stuff. And that's why the federal government is facing, a decade of budget deficits and quite large deficits. And unfortunately, what we saw during the election campaign, if anything, is going to make the situation worse.
I was kind of taken the other day. I was watching Albo, and you recall how he broke the promise about not changing the tax reforms he'd been left with by the previous government. Apparently, what he said was I watched him say this, he intervened on those tax reforms. He intervened and then changed them. I just wonder how many interventions we're going to see in the next 3 years. Well,
yeah, I mean, certainly they might be forced into it, some of them, because the budget situation is obviously, not fantastic and could get a lot worse. Well, one thing I do hope, now this is just pure hopium, I don't actually think this is going to happen, but I wish it would. Now that Labor has a really strong majority, right? As an outright majority, at least in the House of Representatives, I'm not sure about the Senate, but they have strengthened their position. I'm hoping because they've got a much stronger position, the Greens have been whittled down, they've lost multiple seats, so you get less agitation from the Greens. Their political stock's gone down. Obviously, the coalitions has gone down as well. This is, perfect conditions if you're a government who wants to do stuff. And if they wanted to be sensible, which I don't think they will, but I'm hoping that this is the optimist in me. I'm hoping that Labor uses this opportunity because they won't be so scared about making a mistake, so they might lose government, etc., because they have a strong majority, that they might actually take some bold action. So we might actually, I'm hoping they could revisit the 2010 Henry tax review and, bring forward the process of tax reform. I'm hoping that they can have the courage to have an East Coast gas reservation policy, which was actually one of the coalition's great policies during the election campaign, to give us cheaper energy prices. Actually, those sorts of things.
Yeah, no, looking at it that way, that's very interesting because, if there's one thing every politician wants to do, it's leave a legacy. And you're right, here is an opportunity for this government to really leave a legacy for the next 10, 20, 30 years, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, because they don't really have an opposition at the moment. So the coalition's going to be a rabble for a while. They've obviously just lost their leader. They're going to have to elect a new leader. They've lost a few senior figures in there. They've only got 30 odd seats, so they're going to be a rabble for a while. So Labor's going to basically have the command of the kingdom, and they don't have to worry about being agitated by the coalition, being sniped from the side. They don't have to worry so much about the Greens now because the Greens have lost several members. Like Max Chandler Mather, always was a loudmouth on housing and stuff. So he's gone. So they really do have the rule of the roost. So if they want to actually do some things and do some proper reform and not be timid about it and not be scared about making a mistake and potentially getting kicked out of government in the next election, now's the time to do it. And I'm hoping they have the guts to actually do it. We think this country badly needs root and branch tax reform. I mean, the Henry tax review was done in 2010.
Yeah.
And it basically laid out the blueprint, which all subsequent governments have ignored. But all that stuff that was written, 15 years ago, was necessary then. And if anything, Mike, it's more necessary now because our tax systems become even more narrowly based. Where the indirect taxes like fuel excises and, alcohol and tobacco excises, they're all shrinking.
Yep.
So the government's getting less and less money from those areas, and it's becoming more and more reliant on income taxes, which is ultimately unsustainable when you have an ageing population, you have a shrinking share of workers. So we really need to broaden the tax base, and also we obviously need action on energy. Like, Australia should have some of the cheapest energy prices in the world. We have all the stuff you need for cheap energy, but through policy failure, most notably in the gas market, whereby on the East Coast here, we export nearly 3/4 of the gas, but we've engineered a gas shortage and we've given ourselves incredibly high gas prices, which then pushes up electricity prices. The Coalition had a fantastic policy to do an East Coast reservation policy, basically copy what they do in WA, and to reserve gas for domestic use, to bring down gas prices, which also helps to bring down electricity prices. I'm hoping Labor now will have the guts to, do a policy like that, because they don't have to worry about, if the energy lobby snipes at them from the side, well, they've got a stomping majority here. And I'm hoping they'll have the courage to then take them on. But whereas the first term Albanese government was too afraid to do anything.
Well, it will be interesting to see. But when you talk about new sources of revenue, I would be inclined to bet that one of those new sources will be a tax on unrealized capital gains. What do you think?
That's a bad policy. Yeah, unfortunately, that was obviously flagged during the election campaign. I'm not a fan of it. I think it's a very slippery slope if you start taxing people for gains they haven't even made.
Yeah.
It's just a very slippery slope. And the reason why it's also stupid is, well, what happens if financial markets then fall? Is the government going to then give them a check?
Good point. Yes.
It's a very one-sided policy. If you make a unrealized gain, they tax you. Well, what happens when, if we have a share market correction? Are they going to refund you that?
An unrealized loss.
Yeah,
yes.
it's just very slippery because it can start with so-called high net worth superannuation people, so people with over $3 million in super. Well, what happens that from the policy we've heard so far, it's not going to be indexed to inflation. So that means in 10 years' time, $3 million becomes the equivalent of, say, $2 million.
That's right.
In 10 to 15 years. Well, then you start trapping more people, and then are they going to then try and extend that into other areas? Like, if you have an investment property, are they going to try and tax you on the unrealised gains there or other stuff?
Oh, I think if it works, they certainly will. Leith, I appreciate your time and comments as always. Thank you very much for coming on the program.
Yeah, no worries, Mike, anytime.
Leith Van Onselen, Chief Economist at Macro Business.
Are you